Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 18th and tonight's movie is Gone Girl. This film is from 2014 and directed by David Fincher, who has directed a lot of very well-known thrillers such as Zodiac, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and Fight Club. He also directed Seven, which is another movie I watched for Horror Nights. There are a lot of big names in this cast. The main cast includes Tyler Perry, Neil Patrick Harris, and Ben Affleck as one of the leads. The other lead is played by Rosamund Pike, who, while certainly not unknown before this movie, didn't really have a major leading role. That changed with Gone Girl. She got nominated for an Academy Award for her performance in this movie. This is based on the 2012 novel of the same name, where a wife frames her husband for her own murder in order to get him back for cheating on her. And this plan of hers, at least from the trailer, goes off without a hitch, at least at the beginning. And that's mainly because of two things. The first thing is that her husband, Nick Dunn, is a profoundly unlikable person. The original author says that it's not really based on any sort of true crime case, but there are a lot of parallels between Nick Dunn and Scott Peterson. If you know that case, he was a very unlikable person too. But the other reason why this goes so well is because Amy Dunn is actually a cold, calculating psychopath. She's not just a scorned lover, she is a villain. I do know the general plot outline of this movie, but this is the longest movie I'm watching this month. It's almost 2.5 hours, so they got plenty of time to tell this story however they need to. I'm gonna go check it out. I just finished watching Gone Girl, and it is among the best movies I've seen this month. I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. It was beautifully executed, but it's also, kind of depressing, especially at the end. Gone Girl is well acted, well written, well directed, and features a scene or montage that is among the most well done sequences I've seen in a movie. Rosamund Pike deserves all the adulation she got for her portrayal as Amy Dunn. I've heard this villain be described as one of the better villains in movies, and after watching this film for myself, I think I can see why. There are villains that are spiteful, villains that are ruthless, but what makes Amy Dunn so scary as a character is that you really get the feeling that there is just nothing inside. She is just cold and empty. The way the movie is set up is that the first hour or so gives you the story exactly the way that Amy wanted it to be revealed. It starts out with you just seeing Nick Dunn, the main character of this movie, played by Ben Affleck, and you see him discover the supposed crime scene of his wife's disappearance. And as it keeps going, as you see him interact with the police and talk with other people in his life, more and more you get weird vibes from him, and you also reveal that he is lying a lot. And then all at once you get the reveal that he is having an affair, and he is a college professor, and the affair is with one of his students. And for this entire thing, we do hear Amy's voice, but it's all just reading out loud journal entries from a journal that was taken in for evidence. Development after development unfolds, and things just look worse and worse for Nick. And if I didn't know what really was going on in this movie and I was going into this completely blind, I don't think I would have thought that Nick did it. That seems too easy. This movie is too long and it's directed by David Fincher. It can't just be that. I would have assumed that somebody was trying to frame him. And I probably would have guessed it would be Desi, Neil Patrick Harris's character. I probably would have assumed he either acted alone or acted with Amy to set this all up. And that's why I can imagine that people who are watching this in theaters and didn't know the story of the novel were absolutely blindsided by what happened about an hour into this film. This is that sequence that I said was among the best I've ever seen in a movie. It is this 6 or 7 minute sequence where you actually hear Amy Dunn describe her plan in detail. She lays out her motives, the feel of being thrown away, being seen as useless. She talks about what she did, how much research she put into this, how many things that she set up in order to make Nick look as bad as possible. This plan was a year in the making, and she did her homework. She was able to fool everybody just by taking her time and going at this the smart way. Four things come to mind when I think about what made this sequence work so well. there's the direction by David Fincher, there's the writing, and the screenwriter for this movie is the author of the original novel, Gillian Flynn. There is the score, which was composed by Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails and Atticus Ross. It was this like slow burn sort of like cinematic, like all rock kind of piece. It almost kind of reminded me of In the House in a Heartbeat from 28 Days Later, except a lot more toned down. And lastly is Rosamund Pike's narration as Amy. And what makes this so chilling, especially in retrospect, is I propose that this is the only time in Gone Girl where we actually hear from Amy Dunn. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that, because she talks all throughout this movie. It's been widely speculated that Amy Dunn only values the way that she looks to the outside world, the way that she's perceived. This probably comes from, psychopathy, and also the fact that her parents wrote a book series called The Amazing Amy, which is based off of her life, except the fictional version of her is better at everything. Like, she quit cello, the fictional version became like a cello prodigy. She got cut from the volleyball team. Her fictional version of herself is like captain of the volleyball team, which, like, don't ever do that. That's like awful parenting. As you can imagine, this took a big hit to her self-worth growing up, and I feel like as an adult, she thought that she can't beat the amazing Amy when it comes to being better, but she could make it look better. So that's why she wanted to cultivate this ideal life for herself with like the perfect husband and the perfect fantasy. And she didn't even care if it was real. Throughout the film, Amy reveals herself to be a master actor, someone who's willing to create these personas, these masks that she puts on for other people. And this one sequence of her narrating her plan is the only time where she's not talking to or for another person. There was no point in Gone Girl where I could be sure that Amy wasn't being fake when she spoke, except for this part. And the Amy Dunn that you hear during this sequence, and this is the first time you're hearing from her directly in the movie, is such a spiteful, callous, heartless person. It is so ridiculously evil, and the way she's talking, it almost feels like she's putting on like a deep voice, like a villain voice. But what's scary is that this might be the only time in the movie where she isn't putting up a front. She's not performing here. This is just who she is. There are a lot of deeper themes to be discussed in Gone Girl, but I'm going to save that for the spoiler section. In the meantime, you're going into this movie knowing about as much about it as I did, and it was still able to throw me for a loop a few times. I would highly recommend this. I definitely like this a lot more than Seven, and I really should add David Fincher to the rotation for horror nights. The only real problem I have with Gone Girl is that it's so good at what it does that it's actually kind of a depressing movie by the end of it. And to further expand on why, I'm going to go into spoilers now. Amy Dunn is apparently a very polarizing figure in feminist circles because, on one hand, she is a great villain and she's a woman, but on the other hand, that's also kind of leaning into some of the negative stereotypes about women, like they'll make up lies for personal gain. And I think that was kind of the point. There is some psychological and sociological evidence pointing to the fact that there is an implicit bias men and women have to tend to apply a few more positive traits to a woman they don't know as opposed to a man they don't know. And again, this doesn't apply across the board in every situation, but it can apply in some cases. And that is something Amy Dunn absolutely leverages in this movie. She doesn't really do that much to make herself look good in the situation. She just needs to make Nick look really bad and make her look like one of his victims. And the first hour of the movie, the story as Amy Dunn wants the world to see it, really does lean into a lot of the stereotypes. Like the first scene where it shows Nick being a useless husband, he's sitting on the couch playing video games. And furthermore, Gone Girl is also a scathing criticism of the media. There is one character in this movie who's meant to be a parody or, I guess, satire of Nancy Grace, and she jumped right on this story and would go on to call him a sociopath, which is, again, it's not an insult. That is something you would need a psychologist if you actually wanted to diagnose someone with something. And throughout the movie, we establish that Nick is very close to his fraternal twin sister, Margot, played by Carrie Coon, and apparently her first movie role. She did a great job. And the Nancy Grace stand in asserted or implied, based on absolutely nothing, that they had an incestuous relationship with each other, just to make Nick look worse. And later, like at the end of the movie, when everything is cleared up, supposedly, and when she's actually confronted for her behavior at the end of the movie by Nick, she literally does not care, which is an accurate and unfortunate allegory to how men's mental health in general is treated in Western society, at least in the past 10 years or so. But if you ask me, I think that fundamentally Gone Girl is not about gender relations or the media or marriage. I think that the whole movie has the underlying question of, in the end, what ultimately matters more? How something is or what something looks like? And the reason why I think this movie is so depressing is that at the end, appearances win out. Nick, as odd as it is, considering the fact that he is a liar, is representing truth and sincerity. When things get bad, when all the chips go down, he wants to tell the truth, but the people around him keep telling him not to because it looks bad. He will be sincerely polite and friendly to people that he meets at first, and that is something that is criticized and exploited at least a few times in this movie. Amy Dunn is the opposite. She only cares about how things look, appearances, perception. She will put on any mask necessary in order to create the image that she wants. And she wants to be able to puppeteer her partner into being part of that image that she wants to put out into the world. The reason why she gave up on her plan of faking her own death is when she saw a television interview of Nick, where Nick looked directly into the camera and said all the things that she wanted to hear from him. And she knew that he resented her because one of the things that she did is that she created this sort of anniversary scavenger hunt for him, which would show step by step that she was fully aware of his infidelity and rubbing that in his face. And at the very end, not confessing, but strongly implying that she set this all up because she wanted him to be in jail, if not given the lethal injection and executed. At the time, she's with Desi, that Neil Patrick Harris character, one of her ex-boyfriends, and she like gave him the whole sob story about faking her own death because Nick was just so abusive towards her. And I think at that point she realized I could control Nick a lot easier than I could control Desi because in this situation, he's the one with all the resources. He has the mansion, he has the stuff, but she could flip things around and be able to puppeteer Nick however she wanted if she played her cards right. So she did. She faked her own kidnapping again. Except this time she made it seem like Desi was the one who kidnapped her and tied her up and sexually assaulted her, and she had to kill him in self defense. And she comes back to the house covered in blood, crying, and melodramatically walking into Nick's arms. She makes a big show of publicly forgiving Nick for his infidelity, and with that, she has him trapped for at least as long as the media remains interested because he can't just leave now. And in this process, there were two cops covering this case mainly, and one of them, she is asking questions. She's actually challenging the narrative, and she sees in real time Amy lie, shift the narrative, brush away questions, dodge accountability, and she is able to put together that no, this woman is actually very dangerous. And if all that wasn't enough, she covertly, artificially inseminated herself with semen that he donated to a sperm bank so that she could get pregnant and trap him by using the baby as a bargaining chip. And that's why this movie is so depressing because the villain 100% wins in the end. Truth loses out to appearances. And there was something that was mentioned when I was reading the summary of the book that I do wish they'd figured out a way to integrate into the movie because at one point, Nick tells Amy that he feels sorry for her. And one of the themes that's explored in both this movie and other examples like No Longer Human is that for someone to actually be a narcissist and a psychopath, for someone to actually be cold and calculating and emotionless, that would be profoundly lonely because they can't relate or connect to anybody else. And with Amy Dunn, that exact thing that makes her pitiable is also what makes her so horrifying. I think Gone Girl resonated so much with a lot of people because it deals in a lot of truths, and those truths are pretty uncomfortable. Mostly the idea that a lot of people will choose a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth. I think that the themes were explored very well in this movie. It opens up for a lot of discussion. I thought that Gone Girl was really good. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow.